Well, we didn't promote this too much today, but we are thrilled to be here with the Women Who Make Us Wine show. I have a little coffee in my wine glass today. It is Saturday morning, May 1st, happy May. And this is our bi-monthly podcast video series that shines a light on the women who put the magic into our glasses, not the coffee, but the vino. I'm Hope Katz Gibbs, producer of the show and founder of Incandescent Radio and Incandescent TV. Today here with my co-host, Jim Morris, the wine guy of Napa and Sonoma County. And we are more than thrilled to introduce you to Alison Doran. In fact, so Alison, I don't know if you know this, but you were the reason that we started this show. You are a veteran wine industry winemaker and one of the first female winemakers in California. You have more than 3 decades of winemaking experience and got your start in 1973. But when I was visiting Jim at Charles Krug Winery, I picked this up. And I thought, and I have been carrying this bookmark around with me for years in a Bible of mine. It's called Practical Kabbalah, which is ancient Jewish mysticism, and I love it and wisdom. And so you have just come with me through my travels for years until I finally landed in New Mexico. So thank you for being here. Thank you for inspiring me. And Jim, I know you and Alison have a long history, so I'm going to turn the first questions over to you.
Well, it's a thrill to be back with our bi-monthly podcast here, and we've talked about having Alison on since the very beginning of this. This is, I believe, our 6th episode now, and so Alison and I, and she's been making wine a little bit more than 30 years. I think she's got probably Are you close to having 40 plus years or what?
Yeah, I think I'm at 47 or 48 this year, depending. I think I missed one crush, but other than that, yeah, from 73 on, I think I missed 74 because I was still at Davis.
Yeah. So, and I've known Alison and her husband Mark and their 2 boys since the kids met in kindergarten at Alexander Valley School a couple of years ago, and Alison's family, her dad Russ is like, and her mother BJ are 2 of the most iconic, wonderful people in the world. Russ passed recently, and BJ, God bless her, is just one of these loving souls that just was such a wonderful part of this valley, and you kind of carry that legacy on. But tell us, if you would, just kind of your wine journey starting in 73 and even before that, when your dad bought the ranch out there.
Okay, yeah, I'll try and keep this brief because we only have half an hour, right? But yeah, no, we were down in Southern California. My dad was in the oil business, but his family had cottages on the Russian River since the turn of the century in 1900. So canoes, and one day Dad was reading the Wall Street Journal and he realized that the ranch that had the best swimming hole on the Russian River had just come on the market. So we ran up and took a look at it and figured out a way to buy it. And it was only about 100 acres back then, and they'd been running sheep on it, but we'd go up for summer vacations and Thanksgiving. But our caretaker said, if you don't put something out here, I'm going to get bored and leave. So you have a choice of prunes or grapes. And Dad said, well, I'll talk to some friends, and they all said, well, like the Wenties and some of his other friends, and they all said, oh yeah, grapes. Alexander Valley should be a great place for putting in grapes. And so he put in basically the first wine grapes since Prohibition, and then hired some really good people like Ivan Schock and Dale Good to run the ranch. And the Wetzels came in with us in 67, I think, or somewhere right in there. And they bought the store ranch, and we started joint venture farming. And so now we've got a really nice, beautiful vineyard, family vineyard. And the Wetzels started, of course, Alexander Valley Vineyards. And then about in 07, we started our little project to make, really beautiful wine off the family cab vineyard that my brother put in up on the hill here. And I started working for the Firestone Vineyard in 1976 because André Tchelistcheff had been hired by my dad to help consult at the Simi winery. My dad actually hired, we believe, the first woman winemaker outside a family, who was Marianne Graff. And she had all the degrees, but she had not made fine wine. And she'd been in the valley and made those types of wines. And so when my dad hired her, then she said, well, I need a consultant. And everybody said, well, try and hire André Tchelistcheff because he's the best there is. So my dad went down to visit André Tchelistcheff at BV, and he said, well, I realize Hugh Blind just bought this place and they're going to be coming in here and things might be not the same anymore. So if you want a fun project to help us with, come on out. And about 3 months later, Andre's he does not give up on things. So it took him a while to decide to do this. But luckily it was before Crush in 73. And then they decided that it would be good for me to drop out of Davis for a quarter and work with them. So,
Alison, I'm going to jump in really quick because one of the things that it's always fun to learn more about. Tell us a little bit of background of André and what he meant to the wine at the time, and and then about his mentorship.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Well, André was he really believed that winemaking was had three main facets to it. And one, of course, was the grape growing, which he was insistent that winemakers put their 2 feet out in the soil and see what was going on out there. And then also sanitation and lab analysis. And then third was to have a program of experimenting and investing and trying new stuff. So he was just a wonderful mentor because all those things are really important to me all the way down to today. I was just, before I got on, I was just, I'm always curious about my latest numbers. So I was just printing off my latest numbers, to write down from the rackings yesterday. I love getting a new fresh analysis sheet so I can really get a picture of what's going on. And of course, sanitation. I think when André and I would go around on top of the tanks during fermentation, I would carry a bucket, with cotton and a wet rag and a thief and a glass, and gosh, there's probably a couple of sample bottles, thief, and we'd go around. And at that time, Simi, the tanks were these tall oak and redwood tanks that were only about 2.5, 3 feet from the ceiling, and they were 14 feet off the ground. And so, well, probably not that much, but it seemed like a long ways. And you had to scramble across the top of these tanks and find the bung hole in the corner, and then clean it off nicely, and then take a sample for André. And he would look at it with his flashlight and then smell it to be able to tell what kind of activity was going on in there. And then he'd listen to it to see whether it was bacteria or yeast. And then finally he'd taste it and they'd go piggy or oh, it's a dilly piggy, whatever, and then he'd write little things in his notebook about what was that also, was and then we put everything back in the bucket, clean it all up, put a new layer of cotton around the bung, put it back in there, before we had fermentation bungs or anything. And then we climb off to the next tank. And we'd do this for 25, 26 tanks, whatever it took. And it was quite the experience. And when I finished up with that, I had more questions than answers. So I went back to Davis and changed my major from animal science to fermentation science. And I was hooked. That was the hooking moment. Well, it wasn't a moment. It was couple of months where I realized I actually could do that. I may not be the executive, I may not run the company one day, but I could do the winemaking stuff. It was very interesting.
So from your time with André at Simi, and then on to Firestone, tell us about some of the projects that you've done, since especially up here in Napa and Sonoma County.
Well, I should say, anybody who doesn't know about André, he was born around the turn of the 19th century, and his father was a Supreme Court judge. And during the Revolution, of course, they all had to run for the countryside, and André had to jump on the top of trains and sell the family silver and get beat up, and then he had to go back. He decided to join the White Army and went back down to the Crimea, and it was just quite he drove laundry wagons in Turkey, and I mean he just really had quite the long and prolonged experience trying to get out of Russia. And then finally, by the time the war ended, he went to Paris and went to school at the Institut de Pasteur in Paris, and he learned a lot about all kinds of things. He was trying to get a good agronomy degree, but one of the things he always understood and loved chickens and what made chickens tick. So I know one time I had a problem with my chicken, but I didn't really know it. And he was walking into my house, and he said, after we got into the house and we're going to have dinner, he said, your chicken has a sour crop. And I go, no, I didn't. And he goes, yes, it is well known. The chicken goes, and I said, oh, yes, it is doing that. And he says, yes, sour crop. Turn the chicken upside down, milk all the stuff out of the crop, feed it nothing but melon and cream of wheat for a week, and it will be fine. So I had to keep the chicken in the bathroom, for like a week while I did all that. But sure enough, but that's just an idea. Just one thing about André, who just knew so much about everything. He was just an incredible person, always curious, always observant. You could get him to go anywhere by saying, I think the soil over in this area is just a little different than that. He'd be like, boom, he'd be out there.
One of the, and Hope had a question she was going to ask you, but there was one question, a story that I heard about him that I always just found so fascinating, is that he was a chain smoker, and that when he stopped smoking, that it totally changed his palate, and it kind of wrecked his palate. Is that true, or is that part of a folk tale and then he picked smoking back up again?
Well, it's true. When he had caught flu or something at an early age and only had one lung to start with since about age 9, and he'd also been smoking since about that same time. And when he got really sick one time, he gave up smoking, and what he lost was his perspective. He lost that long experiential perspective that was built around cigarette smoke. And so he could still taste, but it just didn't relate to what he knew from the past. And so he didn't, it was a very, out of body experience for him. And what he did after that is he'd have like one cigarette in the morning just to get set, and then one maybe, in the evening, but he did pretty much give up smoking. He just had that one cigarette with the guys out behind the dumpster. He'd come down to Firestone, and all the guys, he'd go back out there, join the guys having a cigarette out behind the dumpster. So it was it was one of his many things that he did to be able to connect with people, on that sort of personal level. Oh, he was just wonderful. And Dorothy would, of course, always ask, "Oh, how's the baby doing?" and to everybody. And so everybody just loved to see them come, and they were just really generous spirited people. It was and that when my dad bought the Simi winery in Healdsburg in '69, and our family moved up in '71, but I went off to Davis, so I hadn't really lived in Healdsburg much. But I only worked there at Simi for maybe 5 months, and then by fall of '74, my dad sold the place to Scottish in Newcastle. And in '75, I went to Alsace and worked in crush and stuff there. Then I went to Hoffman Mountain Ranch and worked there. And then I was going to go back to Davis in the fall and finish off my degree with the few courses that I still needed. And that's when André came, and I was sitting on my mom's dock trying to sun myself and read Vogue magazine. And he came up and kicked me in the side, said, "What a waste, what a waste. I have a job for you." kicked me a couple more times. And so I got up. He said, "You will drive down to Firestone Vineyard. I have a job for you down there." So I started in just before harvest in '76 and stayed until 2000, the year 2000. It was just a wonderful family experience. And I did fox hunting and learned to play polo and sang in the church choir, did team pinning, all that sort of thing that a great, ranch in Santa Ynez Valley would have to offer. It was just a fabulous experience. And we had the biggest vineyard, so we got to do all these experiments and learned so much about viticulture. It was great. I just loved it.
It's like Camelot West Coast version.
Yeah, no, it was great. And plus, I married my cellar master. That makes it even more like Camelot. Mark was my cellar master, and I'd known him for like 7 years before the light went on, so I married my cellar master, and I had my first 2 babies, my first 2 kids down there with midwives at my own house, and went back to work within a couple of days, because it's, that's the kind of job it is. And Mark took care of the kids and brought the baby over to nurse, and all. Thank goodness for the Firestones, because they all thought this was probably just normal, It was the only way to have kids. It was because it's the whole job is so, it takes so much time and energy and thought that I never thought I'd ever have kids, because how would I manage that? But luckily it all worked out.
That's amazing. You're amazing. And it's wonderful to hear the history. There's so much to wine because it's, history, it's agriculture, it's how America evolved. But tell us a little bit about your experience as a woman in the wine business. Has it been different, do you think? I mean, obviously, there's not as many women as men in the business, but just give us a little, perspective on that.
Well, I think I had a fairly unique perspective. I grew up with ponies and then horses and pony club, and I was a firstborn kid, and I was determined, to set a good example for my sister and my family, and so my saddle was always clean, and my horse was always well groomed, and I did pretty well, and I jumped, and I did dressage and all that sort of thing. But you also have a lot of work, you're slamming, putting corrals together and cleaning out horse manure and shoveling and all that stuff that you might, moving hay, all that stuff you might not want to, you have to really love horses to do all that. And my parents were like, well, if you don't want to do it, we don't want to have your horses. So we showed Morgans and hunter jumpers, and so I was all set up for when I had to, in the small fine print of my contract at Firestone, I was supposed to be playing polo and going in the fox hunt. So that was just another piece of it. But because of that, I knew what I could do. I was a big, strong girl, and I could lift all kinds of stuff. I could shovel well. I could get that last grape off the ground. So as a woman, I went in there knowing that I wasn't going to be treated quite the same as a guy, but that I was going to work harder and make sure it all got done, and that they would not regret having hired a woman. That was what was important to me. So I didn't whine. I really got in there and tried to be comfortable with the guys, and I learned to swear a little bit because I never had, and things like that, so that I wouldn't make anybody feel like I was too good for them or whatever. And so then I just, working with my family and their business, and with André, gave me the lines on my resume, so that when I went to work for the Firestones, I started out in the lab, as all girls do, and then moved into the cellar on weekends when I could get a chance. And I remember when I first got to run the must pump, the pump over must pump all by myself, because nobody else wanted to come in that day. And I'm like, I'll do it. So you tie everything down and turn on the pump and listen for the stuff to hit the tank in the top, and then run up the stairs and then pump over the tank and then run back down the stairs and throw it in reverse, and then and then turn it off, move to the next tank. It just, it still gives me goosebumps. I mean, the first time I was all by myself running. Of course, they wouldn't let you do that now, be all by yourself in a winery, but it was, it was just moving down the line and not spilling anything and getting all the tanks pumped over and all that. That was really an exciting thing. And then from then on, nobody was afraid to have me do anything. I did all the topping, I did all the lab work, then I started running the bottling line because the winemaker liked to go out to lunch and not come back. And so by the time, and then the cellar master got hired to go up to Schramsberg. And so in, what was it, 1981, when Tony Austin and Brooks decided to part ways, then I was pretty much the only person working there. And it was like 2 weeks before harvest. And Brooks is going, well, can you do this? Can you do this? And I said, well, yeah, I can run the lab. I can run the bottling line. I can run I've been the cellar master basically for 2 years, and I keep all the records, and I can't do it all by myself. I have to hire a couple of people, but that's, yeah, I can do that. I'm the most qualified person, frankly. And then, so next thing he did, Brooks went over and asked my mother, well, of course, she's very prejudiced. She thinks I can do anything. So yes, that was so on I came, but we kept André Tchelistcheff for sure. I got to work with André for about 14 years. And the last time I saw André was the day before he died, and they hadn't been able to come to my wedding because he was sick. But I told him, I said, André, we're going to have babies. We're going to have babies. He says, oh, the bambinos. Well, it's not so easy. The husband, the job, the bambinos, not so easy. He's always trying to get you to see all the sides of a problem. He was just an amazing man. But he had all his marbles right up until the end. He was always giving him good advice, So, he was just a really incredible person in my life. And when I came back up here to Napa, in 2000, because my parents were, they're in their late 70s, had some health issues, and I thought it was time to move up here because my kids were 1 and 4, and I could get started again. So try and get up to Napa and Sonoma and make some great wine up here. Did my thing go away?
Nope, you're there, and we're loving your story.
Okay. I saw Jim nodding his head.
No.
Oh yeah, no,
we're all good.
no. That's I honestly, I've had the great privilege of hearing a lot of these stories from you over the 20 plus years we've known each other, and yeah, it is fun every time I hear them or hear new stories, or you used to hear stories your dad would tell or your mom would tell, and or even Mark, and that's part of the joys I get out of this business, is that these are family stories mostly. They're not corporate stories. They're not this. They're family stories. They're human stories, and and it's.
That's true. No, I wouldn't want to talk about my corporate stories. I might get sued or something.
No, trust me. It's like and it's funny because it's like when Hope and I decided to start on this venture, she came to me with the idea and all this, and she was like, but let's just focus on, like the pioneers and the women whose stories aren't really told as often or as well, and don't have all the press. And I was like, yeah, it's like, and I know a lot of those. Or it's like Katie Murphy is going to be on a future show soon as well, and she's got another one of those pioneering women that I respect a great deal. But it seemed like Sonoma County in particular, but in somewhat in Napa, really women did lead the way in a lot of, Sonoma County was like first to hire a number of women winemakers. And I was wondering if you could share just some of the earlier pioneering women, in the business, both in Napa and Sonoma, that you worked with or that you knew of.
Well, of course, Marian Graff, she was, as far as I know, the first. And then Zelma Long and I have been, first, we did stuff, in the wine industry together, and now we're pretty good friends. In fact, she gave me my last client, Lowell Justa from South Africa. She's made sure we met each other, and he's doing a cool project now that I'm in Custom Crush in Napa. He we're making wine up in Napa, and he's shipping the wine in barrel down to his little shop in La Jolla and selling it by the glass or by the growler, and not doing any bottling. And it's quite the project. He's sending like 50 to 60 barrels a year now, even with COVID and the whole shop. So that's been
Wow.
it's always good to get to know a lot of people. But it's funny because down in Santa Ynez, I had a couple of women who came up through the Firestone ranks and became, winemakers, Clarissa and Lane Tanner, and then up here though, it's funny, with a winemaker room at Laird, where I do custom crush now, and most of the people in the winemaker room are women doing like Celia Welch and Carrie Auringer, and I mean they're just they're excellent women. We all just have a great time up there, either avoiding each other or talking a lot, depending on how busy everybody is. But
so if a woman wants to come up through the winemaking ranks, what advice do you have for her?
Well, it's best if you have a degree from one of the, the three sort of, the Fresno, the Davis, or the Cal Poly. Though now, the JC, Sonoma State, really have a lot of great courses, and I think Sonoma State has been concentrating more on the wine business side of it. But it's good if you start out with a degree, just so you feel more valid yourself, so that you're not don't get that fraud complex. Because even with all my experience and everything, the first 5 or 6 years that I was a winemaker were tough on my kind of fraud complex index, thinking, gosh, he could hire anybody, maybe I'm not worthy, even though I was doing all the work and I was successful, and but it's a common thing. So I think it's a good idea to have that degree and then work in the field for a couple of years, and if you can, go to tasting groups and form your own identity as to what you think before you go in and just try and imitate somebody else. It's great to have a mentor, but André Tchelistcheff, for instance, he didn't really, except for kind of cleaning wines up and doctoring them, he didn't try and lead my palate. And I tried doing some, the way we used to make Chardonnays, we would crush into a tank, and then we would press it off, and then we would clean it up, and then we would ferment it, and then we would clean it up again, and then we put it to barrel for aging. And that's a lot of cleaning up, right? So I'd go around and visit other wineries, and I finally figured out that you could do whole cluster pressing and have everything come out pretty clean. And then you could do barrel fermentation, but I had to buy I tried all kinds of things to try and do barrel fermentation at a low temperature, but we were doing non-alcoholic beer in the winery through some of that, and that really raised the temperature in the whole winery. So I had to buy a cold box container, a used one, and throw the barrels in there, which was actually really dangerous when I look back on it. But nobody was watching, so it made really good wine. So then I could get Brooks to buy me some refrigeration equipment for one of the rooms. But it was just, I think it's just, you have to be prepared for long hours, hard work, stomping through vineyards, and volunteering for all the extra stuff that you need to do. And that's how you get into the wine industry. And hopefully you're
one of the questions that I love to ask is you have such a breadth of experience in the business, but is there anything you have left to do that you really want to do that you haven't done yet?
No, that this project, my Houdal Vineyard project, just to make sure that my parents and my brother's grapes got the best shot they possibly could. That was something I really wanted to do. And of course, every year is different. And thank God we didn't actually crush last year, mostly due to financial things. After my dad died, we just tie up the cash. But we really, because that was, now I'm going through all these experiments. I mean, I think the most important thing is to just keep trying things, and just keep learning things. Because like because of the smoke and everything last year, there are quite a few. I mean, some of my wines got off almost scot-free, and some of them I used, some products that I had tried like phenol-free in 17 that I felt really good about. I'm sure I knocked down some smoke with those, but I am going to have to run some things through both Contec and through VA Filtration's machine. I mean, who knows? This could be the new normal. You have to really adapt. You have to learn, what these methods do, how the wine takes it, what you can do afterwards to rebuild the structure and the integrity. How long does that take? So I'm really grateful. Oh my word, you get one crush a year, and it's so busy. You have to have a lot of plans out there. But new vineyards, I love when people put in new vineyards. There's so much promise. There's so much, potential to start new projects. But I love history. So I love the history of projects, the history of the people making the wine. I worked with Randy Lewis when I first started out, at Davis, at Laird in Napa, because he had one of the best track records ever. I was so lucky to get the experience to work with him and his wines. Then he got too big for Laird and decided to move. And I already had a couple of clients. I had Lavendi and Nelson, and was just starting with Hill Family about that time. So, and almost all my clients I've had for like 20, not quite 20, but 18 to years. I mean, it's just a long time, just because I'm willing to adapt to family situations. In fact, I love the passion and the commitment that family operations have, even if they're dysfunctional sometimes. It's still, they care what happens. They're willing to put out their own sweat and tears and anxiety to make things work. So I love it.
You're putting the fun back in dysfunction.
Yeah, I know. During harvest, I have grape vineyards a lot. I don't have any in Russian River. I do have one in Sebastopol, but I still put, like, I don't know, 15,000 miles on my car between August and Thanksgiving. Visiting vineyards, getting out there. Yeah. I eat like 3 pounds of grapes a day, I think, and so I don't lose any weight, because I'm like eating and walking and eating and walking. It's like constant snacking, but there's so many decisions that have to be made that are long term, and until you go out there and get your baggie samples and try, what does that grape at the back of the cluster taste like? What does that grape at the front of the cluster is? What about that one that's a little shriveled? What about that one that looks like it's too fat? What about the ones at the end of the vine? What about the ones in the head of the vine? All those, they all have little characteristics that you're trying to get sort of pulled together in your head as a batch. And what can we do? Should we cut those off? Should we open the clusters up? So there are all these questions every year, and you can only get answers by walking up and down and driving and slamming the door and jumping out. So it's I don't know. To me, that's I just adrenaline thinking about it.
I wish there was a way to bottle your excitement and give it to other people, because you have such joy for what you do, and that's one of the contagious things that I always found about being around you and all that. It's like, we really could talk for hours on all sorts of things, historical or wine related. I look forward to actually having a few bottles of wine with you and Mark, out at the house or at the swimming hole down by the river. If there is
that's true. We're up on the hill.
Yeah, or if there's any water left in the river this year, but
yeah, really.
So as our parting thought, Alison, can you give us just a little bit of a little tip that we can take away with us today about your philosophy of life, something that will bring the same joy that you have, your effervescence, to our day today?
Oh my. Actually, I go up and down a lot. I'm inspired by other people a lot. So I'd say one of the important things is to have things like gardening and exercise. Like, I love power walking and just to clear your head and just have that unimpeded time to just things sort themselves almost when you do those things. And then to come home and have, a loving family who enjoys your cooking and a glass of wine. I don't know, it's that balance. It's if you can find balance in your life and figure out what areas are not quite as balanced and not give up on those. But it is hard. I mean, these are hard times. And I watch the young people, whose lives they had a kind of a wasted year last year in a way. But here I was working harder than ever. So it's hard for me to be sympathetic. I can watch them, but oh my word, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of, perseverance and some resilience to get through a year like that. But luckily I'm being a winemaker, I'm an important person in our world up here. And so I was able to work every day. No one ever shut me down. So that's important to me too. I'll die in harness, I think. But no, nothing in particular. I can't think of anything in particular that's a tip.
No.
Well, everything that you've shared in the last 45 minutes is a nugget of wisdom and great fun. I'm like so happy that we actually captured all this. I really hope your oral history has been captured somewhere, like at the wine library or something, because you're like one of those people that has so much knowledge of this business that needs to be captured. And I'm just like privileged to have 40 minutes of it now on film that we could put up in perpetuity. And one of the things too, and I always appreciate the wine sales part of this. If any of the people that view this video want to purchase your wines or wines that are made by you, we'll put the links into onto Hope's website, womenwhomakeuswine.tv, I believe. But we'll put the links up. But is there the best place to get your wines would be?
Heavens. Well, Romeo has my Romeo Vineyards, they have a tasting room. Crane family is by appointment only. Hill family has, website and a tasting room and all that sort of thing. And, it's a good thing. I'm really not a salesperson, and I get very fed up very quickly with sales. So it's a, it's a good thing. We all have our things that we're better at it. Because it takes, and so, but I think, the sales part of it is definitely the hard part. And whenever I'm just starting out probably with a new family and their little project. And the reason is because they've got, they've got their own vineyard, they've got family history, and they've got a son who is a handsome go-getter and is going to sell the hell out of their wine. So, you need all three of those if you're going to start a project these days. And people who just want a small vanity project, that's not the way it's going. We need the story, we need the valid family history, and then you need somebody who wants to go out there and change the world, sell this wine. It's a tough business. It's a tough business.
I've always tried to be the handsome go-getter. It hasn't really worked out for me. But...
all of that there.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you both so much. And I'm glad that I found you. This is the card for Romeo. And we'll definitely try and get people to learn more about where they can buy your delicious wine. And you are just fantastic, Alison Doran. We're thrilled to have had you on the Women Who Make Us Wine show. And thank you to my co-host, Jim Morris. You are fantastic. You are truly the wine guy. So thank you both for this. And we will bring you another episode in a couple of weeks on Facebook Live and some other platforms that we're going to start StreamYarding. So I'm Hope Katz Gibbs, founder of Incandescent. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Jim. Stay safe.
You too. Thanks. That was great.